just for a little bit of a reference, when I took this engine apart, I bagged and tagged everything, and they all went in the bottom section of this toolbox. So like I've got, and those ones aren't tagged, but they are the bolts to this. Actually, I don't know what those bolts are to. Flywheel and pressure plate. So all this stuff, although it's been a while, is in a nice organized state. And we'll get to that later too. But yep, so all this stuff, and these in here in particular are going to be garbage. So when I'm done, I can just put those in the scrap metal pile. But like right now, I'm gonna pull these out. I'm gonna clean them, and we'll use these in the video after I've cleaned them up. So right hand and left hand cylinder heads. Welcome back to Mac's Garage. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like, share, subscribe, or whatever's helping out these days whenever you're watching this. I'm standing here again with a 352 Ford FE engine. This is a 1965 model. They're basically the same through the 352 lineup. 390 is, and I haven't really said this before, a 390 is going to be basically identical to this. The 406 and 427, I think, are a little bit different, but the 352 and the 390 should be essentially the same to assemble. I'm getting ready to put the cylinder head, I've already got one on, install the cylinder heads, the intake manifold, and the valve train. This is kind of a weird engine because you have to install the intake manifold before the push rods. So let's get started on this. I'd like to get this thing done by the end of the day today. And there's still a lot of stuff to put on it. I've already got my gasket laid in place. It says front here. The other thing you need to make sure you have are these dowel pins. Sometimes those will get removed for machining, and you need to make sure that those go back in before you start putting the gaskets and cylinder head on. Along with this job, you need to make sure that all of your bolt holes are free of debris and the bolts spin easily in them. You need to make sure that your bolts are clean, your cylinder is clean, or cylinder head is clean. All of this stuff, the cleaner this stuff is, the better the job is going to be. Can an engine take a small amount of dirt and probably be fine? Yeah, but this is a brand new engine. You don't want to be putting anything through it. So this cylinder head is, well, this gasket surface for the intake manifold is not the ideal situation in my opinion. It's pretty good. I'm going to take some brake clean and my my special rags that don't really leave stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and clean up this surface as well to get it ready to go back on. That's kind of a weird deal there. It's outside the sealing surface, so it doesn't really matter, but that's interesting. So what cylinder was that? That was this one. You can see that it's got a lot of room on the gasket right where that's at, so it's not going to be a problem, but it is what it is. So we're going to get ready, pop this cylinder head on. So I kind of skipped over this on these Velcro gaskets. I don't really want to peel this off, but there's a blue coloring on one side, it's gray on the other. The other side is blue up, this side is blue down. And the big difference here is this gap at the back. This is where the coolant goes. So when your coolant goes into your engine, it goes through all the cylinders first, then it comes back here and goes forward back through the head where it comes out these little ports and goes out the intake manifold. I kind of forgot to talk about this before I put it on, but I'll put this in the video before torquing it. This hole right here is your oil feed. It goes sideways down into this bolt hole. Run a brush, make sure that's clean. That's just part of your head cleaning system that is kind of a little bit odd. Alright. So I'm ready to go ahead and set this head into place. Honestly, like once it plops down onto these dowels, it will kind of stay in its place by itself. But I usually take just the center bolt here and thread it in a few turns so I feel better that it's not going to land on my foot. The torque specs for this engine are with oiled bolts from what I can find. Now, service information for this 1960s engine is not as available as some of the newer stuff, but we're going to go ahead. You probably can't see me doing this, but I'm oiling every bolt I put in. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of these bolts started and oiled. Or oiled and started, I guess. I'm going to pull the camera back here. I don't think I have the computer skills to do this any other way, but I'm just going to point them out what our torque sequence is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that is the order we're going to tighten up these bolts. As far as what the specs are, our final tightening is going to be to 90 foot-pounds on the 352. 390s are the same. So we're going to start out at the lowest my torque wrench will go to, which is 50 foot-pounds. So again, all these bolts are at 50 foot-pounds. I'm going to go up to 70. Now that we're done at 70, I'm going to jump up to our final tighten of 90. Those are all at 90, so on something like this, I like to go back, and I don't anticipate any of them will move, but I like to just go back through the torque sequence one more time at our final number and make sure they're all there. Okay, at that point the heads are now on. Time to move on to the next part, which will be intake manifold. If you're doing this engine, then you already know, but just looking at this intake manifold makes my back hurt. Yeah, it's heavy. So here we go. Now we're ready to install the intake manifold. I did weigh this intake manifold just out of curiosity. It is a behemoth as far as intakes go. It weighs 74 pounds. That's more than the cylinder heads, I'm sure. I didn't actually weigh the cylinder heads, but just by handling both of them, the heads I pretty well guarantee are lighter than the intake manifold. So the intake manifold gaskets, this Velcro set has kind of a neat section where they drop into the head gaskets and will hold in place that way. The end seals, so we've got a couple of cork end seals. So these come with the gasket kit. The way these would work is you would set them on here. They would get held in place, and then they would be held down by the intake manifold. And if you look at this, this is like a solid 1/4 inch thick. So what we've got is a friggin' nightmare. That's what it is. Now, I'm not going to use these. partially because they don't fit well. Like, I'd have to trim them up and deal with them, and then they would seal for like 200 miles and start to leak. So instead of the end seals, what I'm going to use is Permatex The Right Stuff. This is not my favorite container that it comes in. I like just the regular tubes better, but it will work after I go get that back and put it on here. So I'm going to have to build up a wall taller than those seals, so when we drop the intake manifold on, it makes contact with the bottom of the intake and here. This is one of the few things that I've found that very rarely has leakage issues. Like, we'll be able to put it on here and it'll be good for a very long time. The other thing that I'm going to use, I don't know where I set it, right here. Blended in too well, is just ultra black sealant. I'm not going to put this everywhere, but I'm going to put it around the water passages on here. So I'll put a little bit on the head around the water passage, front and rear, and I'll put it on both sides. Now, this gasket is actually out around where most of our corrosion is at. That's why there's corrosion there, because it's exposed to the water and isn't gasketed. But I'm going to put just a little bit of silicone around it to help that seal up. If you remember from teardown, we had leakage from this one down into the valley. We don't want to have that. So ultra black will work. I also could have used ultra blue or ultra gray. Any of those theoretically should be okay. I'm going to go with ultra black because of the oil resistance. It's kind of a toss-up because you've got coolant, which you want coolant resistance for, but you also have some oil that's going to be in this area. So I'm going to go with the ultra black. So let me get this started and I'll put it on kind of a fast motion thing and we'll get this laid down here and ready to go. I'm getting ready to plop this intake down. I've got 2 layers of the right stuff, which should be plenty of height. I put a little bit of stuff around here, and honestly, like, I know there's going to be people that say you shouldn't do that, and it's not necessarily for the gasket. It's more that the sealing surfaces we're going on to are not pristine. We're dealing with 60-year-old metal here. It isn't always pristine. So we're going to, I've got an idea, and it's either going to work really well or it's going to rip the skin off of like 4 of my fingers. I don't know which way it's going to go, but we're going to roll this engine forward, and I'm going to try to install the intake manifold from behind the engine. Let's get the camera tilted down. As with everything else, make sure your holes are clean. Make sure both of your surfaces are clean. I've already done that. Honestly, I have way too much time into cleaning this intake. Like I said earlier, this intake manifold is 74 pounds. So, let's see if I can gracefully do this on my own. Dude, that's down. That looks almost perfect. Might have to come down just a touch with it there. Yep. Very good. Okay. So I'm going to grab a couple of bolts, see if I can get them started. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Yeah, okay. So we're just going to start a couple of intake bolts real quick. tighten them yet. So we got 2 short bolts on this intake manifold, and they're pretty self-explanatory. They go in the back. Now there are 4 bolts on this manifold that should not require any sealant whatsoever. And those are, let me make sure that is true. Let me get my light out. Yep. Okay, there are 4 bolts on this intake manifold that should not require any sealant and should not leak. And those are the 4 corners. So we've got, I don't know, the 2 short bolts. The rest of them are all long. The 2 short bolts and these 4 in the, or these other 2 up in the front corners, we can just go ahead and start them in. Okay. Again, I'm not even making contact with the manifold yet. I'm just starting these bolts. Okay, so those ones are easy. The rest of these, I'm going to get filthy dealing with. And let me show you why. Okay, so as you can see, this end is not going to be a problem. So no amount of thread sealant is going to do anything. But then you've got open space, and then it goes through into this intake manifold. We're going to have to put some type of sealant there, or else oil may well leak out. So on these bolts that are not, I don't know what to call them. They're into a blind hole, but they're exposed. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of this Permatex Aviation Formagasket. I don't have a part number. It's too hard to read. But it's this red, snotty, nasty stuff. I'll do one of them out here. And I'm just going to go underneath the head of the bolt. I'm going to try not to get too much down the shaft of the bolt. But I'm going to put a little bit under the head, and what that'll do is it'll, as it threads in, it'll seal up, and it should seal against the intake manifold so none of the oil comes up through that and pools in the intake. So I'm just going to do that to all of the ones that go through like that. So what I'm going to do now that I've got those all done up a little bit is I'm just going to bring all the bolts down and start in the middle. And just bring them down to where they just touch the manifold. Okay, so I brought them down to where they just touched. Now I'm actually going to start with the speed handle here. I'm just going to hand tighten them with the speed handle, which is probably going to be like, I don't know, 5-10 foot-pounds, if that. So those are all snug at this point. The service information I have doesn't give a torque sequence for the manifold, so I'm just going to go in a crisscross pattern, very similar to what we did on the cylinder head. So we've got these snugged up. The final torque spec is going to be 35 foot-pounds, but we're going to start here at 15. So now that these are all seated down to 15, I could probably do one more in the middle. I'll do like 20, 22. The whole reason for doing this is to try to evenly bring this down. Then we're going to go right up to 35. Alright, and like I've done on everything else so far and will continue to do, I'm going to go ahead and snug these up, or check them, and see, this one's moving a lot. So this particular part, I'm going to go through the sequence a few times until they stop turning, and every bolt is turning so far. As we get farther into the sequence, they move less. Then I will check it one more time. That didn't move. That one moved just a little bit. If I didn't mention this already, oil the threads on these. Make sure I put a note in there. Okay. We're ready to start putting the push rods back in. These are labeled front and 352 FE in case I got another one apart in that time while I had these apart. I've recently cleaned these up as well, so although the box looks a little bit dirty, they should be fine. So what I'm going to do is a couple of things here. One, I'm actually going to use the same assembly lube we put on the cams. And every push rod I put in, I'm going to put just a little dab on the bottom. We'll dab on the bottom. I don't know if this is in frame or not. Before I set them down, and you just have to kind of feel, they will slide into their spots. And this is what makes this a unique engine. We have 6 of the push rods that run through the intake manifold. Very uncommon. So I'm going to go ahead and do all of these, and you guys don't need to watch that, so maybe I'll fast forward. We're now ready to put the rocker shafts on. Almost ready to put the rocker shafts on. I'm going to take more of this assembly lube. I'm going to dot the head of every valve. And every push rod ball on this side as well. The reason I'm doing this stuff on all of these valve train components is these are the highest friction points in the entire engine. A lot of people don't really realize that, but everything to do with the valve train is super high friction. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting this set on. I'll do that one off camera. My recording space is running low. Now, if you marked these when you disassembled, like I kind of told you to in the disassembly thing, go ahead and put your stuff back into the places they came out of. Okay? So we'll start with this oil return shield. This will help oil go back into the pan. And then we're going to grab our rocker shafts. Now when you're looking at your rocker shaft, I'm going to set it into, I'm actually going to bolt this one down. This one is right. Honestly, I need to oil these threads a touch too. Okay. The individual rocker arms, a lot of your modern engines are a little easier to deal with. But this shaft is just going to be a matter of lining up all our push rods into the appropriate rocker arm, getting all the bolts started. This one's not even facing right, so I'm way off on that one. Okay. So we got all our push rods in. I've got all my bolts oiled. So now we can start bringing this down. So when we're looking at our cylinder head, these are the oil shaft hold down bolts. This one looks different, and that's because it's got the oil feed that feeds the rail. So when you're looking at the shaft mounted rocker system, notice that this bolt is longer. That's because it has to go in deeper. If we pull two bolts out, you'll also see, let's put them up here. You can also see that this is a thinner bolt, which allows oil to flow around it, whereas the other three are a heavier bolt because they don't have to have oil pass through. So what happens, and this is backwards right now, when I flip it around, this one will line up with this hole. But what happens is oil comes in here, it goes up around this bolt hole, enters the shaft, and distributes down through the rest of the rockers. So that's why you've got to really pay attention to what bolts go where on these shaft mounted rockers. What is going on with that? It's probably bent a little bit. Is this on the wrong side? No, it's already through. Again, at the end of this, I'm going to show you why it's important that one bolt is in the right place. But these are all starting, so I'm going to just bring them down gently by hand. Okay, just kind of watching to make sure that everything's staying in its appropriate place. So far we're good on this one. Okay. And you'll start to have these, one, you're going to start to get some valves opening. But we're just going to kind of keep working this down until they've all started to bottom out. Okay. Our final torque spec on this seems a little on the high side to me, but I guess they are a grade 8 bolt, so it can probably handle it. Our final torque spec is going to be 45 foot-pounds. So I don't want to bind this thing up at all while we're putting it down. So we're going to start at, let's say 20. And I'm just going to go right there. Okay. Go up to 30. And then we'll finish off at 45 like they're supposed to be. That one makes me nervous. Okay. Oops. Okay, now just give it a good visual. Make sure your push rods are clearing this tin everywhere, which these ones are pretty good. Honestly, this one, I could probably bend it down and not be bad, but it's fine. So we'll go ahead and call that one good. Now I'll do the other one off camera, and honestly, that's going to be it for this video. That was a pretty productive video as far as the visual of the engine. We've got cylinder heads on, valve train finished, intake manifold on. So this thing minus valve covers and oil pan looks complete. There's still quite a bit left to do. We've got our oil filter adapter, our oil pump, our drive shaft, timing cover, water pump, all that stuff. So there's still a lot to be done on this engine, but it's looking pretty close. So I'll keep going and I'll keep making videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Yeah, that's it.